Thank you. All right, everybody. I'm seeing some crazy faces today. This is nutty. Just seeing who's here. You cannot believe the network of strange connections that the WiLD community brings together. If I could tell you some of the stories, I'm just kind of freaking out. But anyway, so there's this ready versus arrived, this particular paradox. I'm not going to go where some of you might be upset, because I'm not going to go where some of you may think I'm going to go. Some of you be like, I have no idea where you're going to go, so I could not care less. But if you were interested, we have done a lot of work in the space of developmental readiness. And it is a talk that we will be putting into our next series. There'll be pieces of that in there. And Claire will be putting in the chat if you want to go check out some of that, because there is some important thinking, I think, that we're doing for ourselves and for the people in our community around what developmental readiness looks like and why it's important organizationally. So there's a couple of different resources that we'll put in the chat to watch for as we go. But one of the things that occurred to me is that we are at the end of this series and this people paradox series. And so I think there's a relevance to that, because I don't think we have arrived. We're just getting started and getting ready. And so I want to I think some of the things that this whole series, when I got into this topic of ready versus arrived, that it led my brain down certain paths. If you're new to the WiLD conversation, also know that this is a place to spur on questions that we have together as a community. And so my job is to sort of ignite that conversation as best I can, and to invite you to bring your best thinking, because we get smarter together. Yesterday, I was with a group of students with my parents. My parents have, along with some other folks, ended up giving a scholarship to a university. And it's 30 years now of scholarship recipients, like 3 to 5 students a year get that. And I have this amazing honor to be on there as one of my parents' kids, just to meet these students who have gotten these scholarships. And so I'm looking at these 3 students, and it's amazing. My dad's 92, my mom's 90, and they're see their faces there. And I'm thinking about, what are these students thinking? Like, one of them was a junior and a couple of them were seniors. They're all business majors. They were studying law, and they're at the beginning and the threshold of their, everything that's in front of them. And so many of us I'm looking at your faces now, like, we know something about what they're on the threshold of, right? It's just amazing to think about what's in front of them. And my dad's telling stories. Like, one of the original donors to this fund was his last name is Kresge, and some of you may know who that is. But basically, the Kresge family is behind Kmart. And so it's just interesting hearing my dad tell these stories, and I'm like, are these young people hearing any of it? Does it matter to them? And I also was thinking about all the things, as we think about what's coming, the places where I just wanted to encourage them. I wanted to somehow give them some thinking around, how the different tensions that are going to be coming, that they're going to face. But I also know that a lot of that might roll off of them at this point, because part of me also hopes that maybe they'll remember something one of us said to encourage them when those difficult tensions come. And I say that because we've moved through a lot of different sort of rhythms regarding paradox in this. It's been 11 weeks of this, of talking about paradox. And I think it's such an important thing. So I'm gonna let the cat out of the bag at the beginning. I don't know if this is a good idea or not, because some of you are gonna be like, this sounds complex. I'm gonna spend my time breaking this down. But let me tell you where I hope we go, at the risk of letting it out too soon. I think it's the inherent paradoxical tensions in the design of our humanity that offer us the possibility of something. Okay, this is why I think paradox is defined as competing tensions, both of which are true. All right. So if a paradox, competing tensions, both of which are true, that it's the inherent paradoxical tensions in the design of our humanity that offer us the possibility of something. And I want to suggest this, that the possibility that it offers us is agency. And let me go a little bit deeper. Not just agency, but something more specific. If we define agency, the power and responsibility of our will. So that it's the actual inherent tensions of our lives that we experience all the time. All the time. I'm experiencing them right now, that offer the possibility of agency and the power and responsibility of our will. Let me say more about that. The power to make a choice. And choice is where we learn and adjust. So this would suggest maybe that all of learning leads back to not just to agency, but leads in a more deep way to something in our humanity regarding these sometimes impossible feeling paradoxes. And by the way, if you're not familiar with the term agency, because I know psychologists throw it around all the time, like we all know what we're talking about. I'm not sure we know what we're talking about, but let me simplify it for some of you. Like, yeah, let's go bottom shelf this, because that's the way I like it. Agency is kind of that belief and ability to grab onto something, okay, to do something or to even think about something. That belief and an ability to get it done. And I think about it this way. I have friends who work in advertising, and they describe, like, there's corporate advertising where like you work inside of Google and you're involved in advertising at that level. But then there's what they call it agency side. So some of you know what I'm talking about. In the advertising world, they call it the agency side of the business. If you're in the agency side, you're working for an organization that a corporation hires to get it done. So they hire out agency. They hire out someone else who's going to get advertising done. So in the same way, this would mean like not hiring it out, but saying, do you have agency to get it done yourself? Is one way to think about that. So here's some more about that. When I thought about agency, this is, I'm sorry, my brain just gets blown apart by you guys. I mean, I see some of the conversations happen during the week and then it lights up something. When you think about agency, so often we think of, if you think about the paradoxical tension, one more tension with agency, I think so often we think of the paradoxical tension as a lack of control. I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure that the actual opposite of agency is a lack of control. I think that, see, the thing is this, if you have agency, you have control. So the opposite of it isn't a lack of control, but it might be more accurately surrender. Letting go, as opposed to grabbing onto the agency I have and I see, it might be surrender and letting go. It feels like a lack of control, but after you get it, the real tension, I think, is this possibility of surrender. Not necessarily like I give up, but I will rest in where I am. I will surrender to something greater than myself. So interesting. So this is, let me unpack some of this now. So this is the last session in our entire series on paradox. We spent 11 weeks on some of the greatest human tensions and paradoxes, and to what I said before, maybe the places that actually offer us the possibility and another tension, but offer us agency and learning. And some of these greatest in our humanity these are real things, right? So some of the things we've talked about, born versus made. The paradox of, is it just that way and it's not going to change? Is it a part of my personality, or is it something I can change and develop? I can blow you away right now. Like, it was one of our wild questions. Are you in a season where you're attempting to accept yourself or change yourself? And I can take it one step deeper. This was our first topic. Are you in a season where you are attempting to accept loved ones in your life or hope that they will change? You know, so there's a paradox in these things. Understanding versus being understood. Presence versus progress, we talked about. Like, is it about being present in the moment or moving forward? Strength versus weakness, or we talked about the concept of vulnerability that week. And all these things are available out there, the videos, if you guys want to check them out. If you haven't, noise versus feedback, me versus we. Like, what is the tension between it being about me and it being about us? What's introduced there? Short-term versus long-term. We had a conversation with Dr. Tiffany Powell, who's here today, on similarity versus difference, like the paradox of difference. And then last week, kind of blew my mind, it was the hero versus villain paradox. And it's interesting, we spent all this time on paradoxes. I mean, there's so many organizationally relevant, important things but because at the deepest level, those paradoxes are a part of what our human experience is about, these choices that we have to make. And I think here's the tension, is that while we seek sort of resolution and resolve with a vengeance, there are so many things that don't resolve, or they resolve and then they continue. We arrive and then we keep going. We're drawn to things that wrap up nice and tidy, but we rarely get to experience them. It's so funny. My wife is good about this. When we go on vacation, she has a rule. So if one of her friends, we might be going on vacation with someone else, says, calls and says, hey, we want to make a reservation for this thing later in the summer. Her rule is this: I don't plan my next vacation while I'm on this one. Yeah, some of you are loving that. That's her rule, and I follow it. It's interesting too, because my whole dissertation Daniel mentioned is on paradox. Some of you poor souls actually asked for a copy, which I had to dig up and find one. And I'm telling you, like reading Rob from his late 20s, and a couple of you knew me then. I know there's a couple of you here today who are fellow doctoral students. It's bigger than they used to be, so it's not a fun read. But it is interesting because paradox has been an important part of my work all my life. We want oversimplified solutions that solve our problems now, but so often we can't, at least maybe not in the way we think. On the flip side, we see some people in our culture saying that there are no right answers. So it's like the opposite of having answers and solutions and goals, and getting there is like just kind of, it's all about the journey. It's everyone's truth is their own truth. And I'm telling you that that's not the perception that I'm embracing. And it's necessary to see paradox either, but it's because it's equally half the truth. I think there's this paradox is about embracing these two truths together. Answers do matter, and so do questions. Your experience of truth matters, and so does mine. There are some things that are more likely to change about us and other things that aren't. And I think that this is what's so interesting, is to live into these paradoxical tensions is not to give into it, to synthesize it, or to pick a side and disguise it as the other, but to truly embrace the paradoxical reality of our humanity, even our work. And I want to try to bring this home, or bring this to kind of the ground level, because there's a lot of big ideas, a lot of philosophical thoughts that some of you are going down, I bet, in the chat right now. What if the truth is that this is kind of what life is all about, organizational life or otherwise? And it's what I mean is navigating fundamental tensions, especially for leaders. I got to tell you, I'll tell you this up front. You don't have to believe this, but in my own worldview, I kind of believe that God created us that way, because I see evidence of it all the time. I think it's at least one thing that separates us, and we could argue about this all day long, from a machine whose fundamental DNA is a list of if-then statements. If any of you learned DOS when you were kids like I did, it's like basically learning how to write if-then statements and zeros and ones. Our experience of our world is dynamic, miraculous, moving, progressive, and resting. And what would change if we looked for the possibilities in these paradoxes and embraced them, as opposed to fought them as tension, in full knowledge that they will produce dynamic tension? It's one of the reasons that when Daniel opens a lot of things up, he says, we invite you into constructive dissonance. We're inviting you into the middle of the tensions that you feel. And then one of the ways to think about this is to imagine if we did not have the tensions. Some of you are still like, I'm not getting the paradox thing. Well, just think about what would happen if we didn't have it. What if there was only we? It's weird to think about. I don't even know how to put that in my brain. And there was no me. What if there was only fragmentation and no glimpses of whole? What if there was only strength with no weakness or vulnerability? And Tiffany, this one's for you. What if we were only different? It's so funny because it's easy to imagine a movie where everyone is the same, and then suddenly the main character realizes that everybody's the same, but then the main character starts to become aware that they're different as an individual. We've seen movies like that, right? But it's harder to picture a movie where everyone is different. It's not very interesting, because you'll have to introduce the character who becomes aware that their sameness is something to pay attention to. You know, so it's like, I always like to, if you take part of it away, you realize it's there. Here's my big aha. This is back to my statement before. It's the paradoxes in our reality that are the DNA of our created way. And they give us something. They give us this opportunity for agency. And let me explain this really quickly. An agency gives us the ability to see and make decisions into those tensions. And decisions are the fundamental building blocks of our humanity. Without them, there wouldn't be any. If we only had agency in the absence of the agency of others, or in the absence of surrender to something greater than us, would we have agency at all? at the core of our paradoxical realities, like I said before, I think this is where it gets kind of interesting, is our will. And that's where it gets really interesting. Like that's where we're facing things probably every day. And what this was fascinating. Some of you who experienced the WiLD Toolkit as a developmental system and process, everything, even everything in the toolkit itself, the conversations that it opens up inside of you and between you, is built on the fundamental reality of agency and the importance of your will. Your capacity to believe and to see that you have a choice to make, and also the possibility that there may be things that you would need to surrender or even maybe sacrifice. Personality and development. I already talked about that. Will I accept you, or will I change? Will I change? Do I expect you to change, or will I change myself or accept myself? Calling and purpose. Will I be open to a call that I may not want to hear, or do what comes easiest to me? How do those things relate? Will I set goals with purpose, or just set goals? Could I be more composed under pressure? And what would it look like if I was? And on and on and on in the toolkit itself. Is just, I realize it's such a core part of that. Everything in our whole intentional leader development journey is built on the concept of the possibility of agency, that my will matters, and that the will of other people matter. And I think when we get there, the answer isn't that there are no answers, or that everyone's truth is the only truth, but it's a yes to all of it. And knowing where the no's are. And what we're left with is a choice to keep going, a choice to forgive, a choice to stay, a choice to try to enjoy the moment, a choice to learn something, a choice to surrender ourselves to something greater than ourselves, a choice to protect ourselves, a choice to get stubborn and locked down, or a choice to see the choice as a choice. I'm sorry. It's true though, right? A choice about when to put ourselves first, to put revenue first, to put others first, to put growth first. Our normal organizational life will default. I think this is true. It will default to only resolution, especially as we begin to think about scale. That's another organizational thing. It's like structures. It's fascinating. I talked to someone this last week who the organization was putting a system for time management in place where every employee was going to click into when they were doing certain tasks, with the goal of kind of knowing where people are working. Not for the goal of control, but we all know that that system could then be used for control eventually. So if we aren't intentional about occupying that tension between our humanity and the systems that our organizational life is built around, and really be intentional about that, we will default to something that breaks eventually, and people feel disconnected, disengaged, and all the rest of it. And I was surrounded by conversations all week about this. So what I hope is that, I don't know what this is going to light up for you. I don't know. I hope this lands for some of you. Like, I'm hoping we move toward this tension. I would say that there's a couple of things I might suggest as fundamental framing that are also probably paradoxes, but they're kind of wild ways of thinking. But one thing is that other people matter. I don't think it should be revolutionary, but I'm putting it right out there. And you matter. That life is a short play and a long play. I don't think we hear that enough, that some of the things that you're about right now are not, you're not going to see resolve. That systems are good. We have them. WiLD Leaders has them all over the place, but they cannot be the lifeblood of what we do. So that's just a couple of things to think about. I'm kind of curious about where this is going to go as we arrive at the end, and we just keep going into what our next series is about together as a community. So let's